Good to see everybody this evening. We're still in Hebrews chapter 10. I didn't get very far Sunday, and that happens sometimes. That's all right. But because I got to a point, I shared some things with you. Didn't get a chance to really finalize that line of thinking. There's some interesting things that he's going to talk about here at the end of chapter 10 that we need to slow down long enough to see if we can't understand what it is he's pointing to, what's he trying to warn them about, and in some ways maybe at least ask ourselves whether our usual kinds of quick answers to what he's talking about here, if they're accurate or not, whether maybe there's something we need to extra think about as it relates to the things that he's sharing here. So we'll get into that here in just a moment, but if you would, let's bow our heads together. Let's share in a word of prayer before we start. Our Father in heaven, thank you for this day that you've blessed us with, this opportunity that we have to assemble here and to appreciate the testimony of your word and to just learn more from you. We're thankful for the encouragement that the book of Hebrews provides, the reminder that when we serve Jesus, it is worth it and that it has value and that it ultimately leads us to you and the promises of eternal life. Give us the courage to not waver from that, to not want to step away from those promises, but to always stay dedicated and faithful to the benefits you provide for us. Strengthen us today, encourage us in every righteous endeavor, and we pray all these things through thy Son's name. Amen. So we got up to about verse 25, right? We talked Sunday morning, and I pointed out to you that it is important for us to at least understand language a little bit here, and there is a distinction between the word assembly and assembling, right? Those are two different things. An assembly is a gathering. It's a place you go to. It's in a moment in time. Assembling is a continual thing that they should be doing. It's the act of gathering together, not necessarily the focus of one particular moment in which they are gathering. And so we've got to make sure we appreciate that. Now, I shared with you Sunday that you can't have assemblings, right? You can't have the action of assembling if the people refuse to assemble. So those two things do go hand in hand, but it's important for us to recognize here that when he says not forsaking the assembling, he's not talking about missing a service. Would he potentially be talking about making a pattern of that? I think yes, right? That's what we would call forsaking. If the dad's out of the house for an evening because he's got some job he's got to be at, you wouldn't say he forsook his family, right? You would say something kept him away from them for a short period of time. If he was never home, then you would say what? He was forsaking, right? He's forsaking his responsibilities. I think that's important in this conversation. That the writer here is trying to convince that audience of people that despite the challenges, difficulties, hardships, whatever they're experiencing, don't forget the assemblings. Don't forget to come together, because what are they supposed to be doing in those moments? Okay, considering one another and doing what? Exhorting. What's the word in verse 24? Provoke. Right? Generally, when we think of the word provoke, it's King James language, but generally when we think of the word provoke, we don't generally think of it in a positive light, right? We generally think of when somebody's been provoked, that's a negative thing. You've provoked me. And generally we think about being provoked to anger or provoked to malice or provoked to violence or whatever it is. But there is a positive way that the word can be used as well. And he said the purpose of this is to provoke unto love and good works, so don't forsake the opportunities you have to gather together to do that. Go ahead, Ken.
The word provokes to stir up, and like I said, we could stir up to anger and malice and all those other things, but like you're saying, that here it's a positive that we stir up one another, provoke one another to good things.
Yeah, and a far better way to be provoking, right, than all the negative things that we can often accomplish through that. So we mentioned Sunday, the reason for this is a lot of the conversation so far in the text has been about personal accountability. Now he's talking about the fact that we've got responsibilities to each other, right? we've got to encourage one another not to quit, not to lose faith in Jesus. You've got to keep considering one another, keep provoking unto love and good works. By the way, notice, let us consider one another. Well, actually, I can back you up further than that. Verse 23 is the beginning of the sentence. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhort one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. That's all one big sentence. It's all one big thought that works hand in hand with each other and needs to be appreciated that way. So here's where we got to, though. That's the lead-in. We kind of talked about those things somewhat some Sunday morning. So he said then, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. What day? Okay? A general conclusion, right, that many have made, and fair in relationship to it, that they could be referring to judgment here. Okay, potentially, as they ought to be looking forward to, as they're not forsaking.
I think the key word in that is that as you see the day.
I think it points toward
Something you have to be able to see.
Yeah.
They know it's coming.
Okay.
I think it's the destruction of Jerusalem.
the destruction of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Because Jesus gave signs to look for.
Yeah.
Mark 20 or Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. These are the things you look for. When you see the city surrounded by armies, you know the destruction is near.
And I tend to agree with that. And not that judgment's out of the equation here, but we don't necessarily see judgment coming, right? The final judgment anyway, you don't see that coming. It comes like what? Like a thief in the night, right? It comes without warning. It comes without knowledge of that day or hour. There's a surprise element about the judgment, the second coming of Jesus that accompanies that judgment. So it's possible then, right, that if he says, as you should be doing this even more and more and more, as you see the day, as you see it approaching, he's very likely pointing to tangible things they would notice happening in relationship to that. So let's do this then. Let's not just say it. Let's look at Matthew 24 for a minute, and I just want you to notice some of the language, and then I want you to come back and we'll look at more of the language here in Hebrews chapter 10. So go to Matthew chapter 24, and let's start in, we'll pick up in verse 6. So he warned them about some false messiahs, some false Christs in the first part of the few verses. Then he says, and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. Those are all things you can see, recognize. They're tangible, right? They're events. They're circumstances that you can appreciate. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Will the oppressors that are coming in this besiegement of Jerusalem, will they care whether or not you're a Jew who has maintained his connectivity to the Old Testament law, or you are a Jewish Christian that's converted to Jesus? Will the enemy care? No. So because of that, you're going to get caught up what? In the same struggles, right? It won't matter when the enemy comes. They're not gonna ask. In fact, they kind of dislike them all equally. So they just, you're going to get caught up in this. The calamities are coming. Then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. Hebrew writer says, provoke one another unto love and good works, because the temptation is going to be to do the opposite. To do the opposite. Many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. Now the temptation might be to think, well, he must be talking about enduring to the end of time, right? When Jesus returns. But it can't be that. And here's why. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, when you see it coming, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Is that something you're going to be able to do when Jesus returns in final judgment? No, you can't run from it, right? There's no running when he descends from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangels, and the dead in Christ shall rise. You're not fleeing from that. It wouldn't matter where you ran to. That's of no help. But it could be a help if this is a real enemy, right? The end he's talking about here, the day he's talking about that's coming, is something that you can escape if you get to the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Sound like something you could do during final judgment? No. You're not. Don't try to come down and gather. Just get. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. When this hits, just go. Get to the mountains. Get away from the city, because when the calamity's there, everybody's getting swallowed up in it. And it wouldn't matter what you believed, didn't believe, who you were connected to, right? The consequences are coming. He even says, woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. Again, irrelevant to the final judgment. Highly relevant if I have an opportunity to escape, but now I've got children that it's going to make it harder. And he says, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. Pray that your flight be not in the winter. When your opportunity to flee Jerusalem comes, pray it's not in the winter. Pray it's not on the Sabbath when you're still, you got all these, right? For then shall it be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days shall be shortened, and there should be no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be shortened. There's a moment in time the judgment comes, but it's a short period of time. He says because of the elect, because there are some believers that are getting caught up in all of this, it won't last forever. And there'll be reprieve. And all I'm trying to get us to see is that seems to fit what the Hebrew writer's telling them. When you see it coming, when you see all of these things approaching, don't neglect to assemble because you're afraid. Don't neglect to assemble because you've decided, I don't know whether I trust Jesus anymore. Don't neglect to provoke one another unto love and good works when you see. I feel like we get a greater appreciation of what the writer's really trying to get these folks to understand if you appreciate what they've already experienced, what they're going to continue to experience, and particularly the audience he's writing to, and the challenges that come because of that. Yeah, go ahead.
Jesus talked about it decades, most likely, before this book was written.
Yeah.
Those people he's writing to in Hebrews, it's not very far from that.
Right.
They're talking about most likely.
And they're most likely already seeing the buildup. Go ahead, Bob.
I think verse 8 capsulizes everything in Matthew 24 pretty well. Is the fact that all these things are the beginning of birth pain.
Yeah.
You're going to be suffering. You're going to have pain, but there's an end to it, and things will change for the best.
And if we're not handling the things leading up to the fullness of this calamity that's coming, then what's going to happen when it hits full force? And I think that's the challenge he's setting before them. We've got to stand faithful now, because these things are going to get worse before this shortened time occurs and they get better.
I think not only, you have the destruction of Jerusalem that he might be talking about, but I think he might be talking about challenges in general, because there would be so much more that we wouldn't know what's going on. Like maybe one family, something's happening with them, and they're having some struggles that this other family's not. But I think the Hebrew writer here is just talking about when there's challenges in general, don't forsake the assembling of these people. You can still provoke each other to love, just don't forget it.
Yeah, and there are general applications that can be learned from it. I think he's got some specific things in mind to them, but I think there are definitely general ideas that can be appreciated from the text as well, as it relates to what he's saying. The thought hasn't ended. Verse 26. For, remember that word keeps coming up over and over and over and over and over again. For if we sin willfully after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful looking for of judgment and fire indignation, which shall devour the adversaries. So, that kind of language seems to be what? That sounds a little final judgment-ish, right? So does he transition, or how does this fit otherwise? I'll get there in a minute. I don't like parsing this section out because it's one big thought.
Back at the beginning of the chapter, they asked him two questions. One was, he talked about they showed him all the buildings there in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
He said, well, one stone won't lay upon another and all be torn down. Yeah. And the other question was, what in the end of the world?
Yeah.
What was that?
You're referencing Matthew 24.
Matthew 24.
Yeah. Yeah. So now, and don't forget what he's already been taught, what he's already taught. So I think it's important. If we isolate this from everything else he said, we might just start drawing whatever conclusions. But
Sacrifice.
yeah. Right. So if you run when this consequential day comes, you may still get swallowed up in it, but if you've abandoned Jesus in the process as well, you've lost everything. You've lost everything. Because the calamity's coming either way, so you lose everything. And all you've got to look forward to then is the judgment itself and the indignation that comes because of that. He that despised Moses' law died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much sorer punishment, suppose ye, shall he thought worthy who hath trodden under foot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified an unholy thing, and hath done despite under the Spirit of grace. So he reminds them of something they understood. It only took 2 or 3 witnesses to come and make an accusation under the Old Testament law of something that you did that would be worthy of death. That's all it took, was 2 or 3 witnesses to make that happen. If under that Old Testament law, it only took a couple of voices to bring the consequence of the penalty of death because of some challenge, how much more if you have trodden underfoot the Son of Man, the Son of God, would you not expect consequence and difficulty and challenge to come to you when you would abandon Him? The consequence that I think he's right, because that's the message. When you've gone back to the Old Testament law and you're trying to use it as your guide, your map, your way of doing things, you've abandoned Jesus in the process. And when you've done that, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins. You can't escape. There's no other answer that's going to be provided for you. There's no way. So when you see that day coming, you get together with your fellow brethren, he says, and you encourage one another to not to not leave Jesus in the most crucial of moments. You're going to need him in that difficult situation. You're going to need him in that moment. Get together and provoke one another unto love and good works and steadfastness in this, because the temptation is going to be to run from everything. But stay steadfast. For we know him that has said, vengeance belongeth unto me, I will recompense, saith the Lord. And again, the Lord shall judge his people. Which people? Because I think I could argue that he's got, in some senses, in that transitional time period, he's got two people. He's got the old ones, right? The Israelites, who were his people prior, who still are, many of them trying to navigate as Israelites. Then you've got his people under Christ. And those who have adopted and become believers in Jesus. So which people is he judging here? In which, but I'm just trying to fish it out of you a little bit here, but he just said the Lord shall judge his people. Is he talking about the old Israelite people? Is he talking about the new covenant people in Jesus? Or is he talking about all of the above?
The assembling of themselves.
Okay, though, partly those who are ignoring these teachings, I suppose we could argue that. Yeah. Okay. Maybe all up. Here's what I'm trying to get you to think about here with me. If we run to end time final judgment, I struggle making sense out of this text. Because he's telling them, here are things that you need to be doing, right? Presently, in preparation for these. It's not the kind of language that fits that conversation. The Lord shall judge his people. It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And all I'm trying to say is we sometimes just make the assumption that all of this is about final judgment. And we warn people, at the final judgment, it's a fearful thing to fall in the hands of the living God. I'm not saying that's not true. I'm just asking, isn't there potentially more here than just this quick general conclusion that we make sometimes out of it? Because when this judgment seems to be coming, He reminds them it's a fearful thing to fall in the hands of the God, a fearful hand to fall in the living God, but call to remembrance the former days in which after you were illuminated, you endured a great fight of afflictions. Here's my question. What does that benefit them if it's over and that's it? What benefit would it bring me if I'm at final judgment to recall the former days when I was first illuminated with the gospel of Jesus Christ? Could that help me somehow? And right. So if it's final judgment, there again, the language of the text doesn't get me there, because he seems to be talking about things that they can prepare for, things ways they should react when they see it. Things that they should consider. Partly whilst you were made a gazing stock, both by reproaches and afflictions, and partly whilst you became companions of them that were so used. That's the language we saw in Matthew chapter 24. For ye had compassion of me and my bonds, and took joyfully the spoiling of your goods, knowing in yourselves that ye have in heaven a better and enduring substance. Cast not away, therefore, your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. When you see this day coming, and you see this judgment besetting over Jerusalem, you need to provoke one another. You need to encourage one another. You need to stay steadfast individually. You need to help one another stay steadfast. You need to be careful not to abandon Jesus in that process, because he's the only person you've got. the only help you have in this moment. When God's judgment comes, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay, right? When that vengeance is mete out against Jerusalem, and I'm just giving you my thoughts here. When that judgment is mete out against Jerusalem, if you've abandoned Jesus, you're just going to get swallowed up in that judgment right along with the rest of them, rather than that remnant that believed Jesus in Matthew 24 when he says, when you see it coming, get to the mountains. When you see it happening, don't come down off your house and pack your luggage. Get on out. If you're out in the field and you took your cloak off, when you see it coming, just go. Because the vengeance of God is coming, and recompense is coming. And you need to be willing to stay steadfast. While you see it coming, encourage one another. Once it's there, Matthew 24, escape when you can. And hope that you have easy enough travels to make that happen. And remember that while you're being steadfast through those challenges and through those difficulties and through those hardships, that the end result that you are looking for is the eternal rest that comes in heaven. Keep your eyes focused on that, he said. Don't focus on the calamity that's besetting you in front. Focus on the hope and the promise and the endurance that allow you to have that heavenly home. So cast not away, therefore, your confidence, which hath great recompense of reward. For ye have need of patience, that after ye have done the will of God, you might receive the promise. Again, if this is end time, final judgment, it's over. What's the need for patience? There's no need for, there's no patient enduring through that. That's a single moment in time, and it happens. But the judgment that he's speaking of here of God, this vengeance and recompense that's coming, is something they're going to have to be patient through, endure through. Let Jesus guide you through. Stay steadfast through. And that doesn't, to me, seem to fit final judgment. They've got to endure this judgment that God is bringing for that period of time. And I think what should help us is the Bible doesn't always just talk about end-time judgment. The Bible has repeated throughout it various moments and times where it says God is coming, and various judgments against various nations, people, groups, situations, what have you. And the more and more I study this, I become more and more convinced that he is challenging them to be ready for when the destruction of Jerusalem comes. And no matter what it brings, don't feel like that's a reason to abandon Jesus. Because if you do, you've lost the only thing that can save you when that end ultimately does come. I saw your hand.
For us, we won't see it come.
That's right.
Jesus said it'll be like a thief in the night. You won't know.
Right.
So you got to be prepared constantly.
Right. And I think that's the distinction here, right? Between what final judgment is like and this judgment that he's talking about in this text. They see it, they observe it, they have opportunity to respond to it. Not the same with the final judgment. By the way, I'm not trying to imply, by the way, that we shouldn't prepare for a final judgment, and we don't need to be ready all the time, and consequence can come to us if we don't. I'm just trying to help us appreciate that I don't know that that's what this text is talking about here in Hebrews chapter 10. Go to plenty of other texts that share those with us about being prepared and ready, and those thief in the night texts are the ones that help us appreciate that.
The final judgment and 2 Peter 3 and 10 or something like that. A thief in the night, he'll come as a thief in the night.
Yes. Yeah, I think that in those conversations Jesus has and in the apostles repeat, there are two judgments he's got in mind. He's got the destruction of Jerusalem, and then there's transitional moments where he then switches that conversation to the final judgment. But yes, I think that kind of language, that's not the kind of language here in Hebrews chapter 10. But when he does talk about final judgment, that's the kind of language that he uses in reference to it.
Well, there's no escape.
Yeah, that's right. There's no escape.
Tell me how to get out
right. And the Hebrew writer has referenced that, by the way, right? In Hebrews 9:27, he referenced that idea of death and then final judgment, right? And so that concept is shared. He's just, I believe, trying to get this audience of people ready pre-AD 70 for what was to come and how they should respond and how they should stay steadfast. And again, here's more language that points that way. For yet a little while, and he that shall come will come and will not tarry. Well, if that's final judgment, and that's a lot of years, that's 2,000 years ago, that he was telling them a little while, and he will come, and he won't tarry. This judgment is imminent for them. The judgment under discussion in Hebrews chapter 10, I think, is clearly understood by verse 37, that it is imminent, not something that they're waiting eons for, something they needed to be prepared for very, very soon. And I understand the symbolic generalizing we sometimes do with that, right? We can say, well, right, a little while, what's time to God? But I think we use some caution there. I think he's talking about this is coming, and it's not coming way down the road. It's coming. And it's similar, by the way, to what John revealed to those churches of Asia when he wrote that revelation and that came from Jesus. And I've always taught folks that if there's one principle out of the book of Revelation you have to understand first before you can even think about any of the rest. And it's early, right? Yeah. Those things that must shortly come to pass, right? What's under discussion in the book of Revelation were things that were going to shortly come to pass. You can't push them 2,000 years out into the end of the future. They were things that were shortly going to come to pass. And it has to shape, because are there lots of things in the book of Revelation that make your eyes roll and your head spin and right? And I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying they're hard, they're difficult to understand. But we can really create some interesting problems for ourselves in our understanding if we ignore the easy parts. And one of the simplest principles in that book is these things must shortly come to pass. Same language here when it came. For those in Revelation, you're talking about God's judgment against Rome. In this text, you're talking about God's judgment against Jerusalem and that final moment of judgment that separates the Old Testament from the New.
I find it interesting that it's not giving, a specific date, and it's saying it's gonna come shortly. And the way Jesus talks about it is like, he says, you better hope it's not during the winter. Or he is like, when it's near the Sabbath, or it's gonna be challenging if you have children. He's not telling them it's gonna be on this day at this time. He says it's gonna come shortly. You don't know when it's going to be exactly, but it's going to come, so you still always have to be prepared. I think the relationship between that and the final judgment is kind of a correlation. We always have to be prepared for the final judgment. We don't know when that's coming.
Well, there's definitely parallels between the two, and the preparation need. It's just what you can do in the one you can't necessarily do in the other when it arrives. Yep.
I don't disagree with what you've been saying, but when you use that phrase, eon of time, the second coming could have happened then. We can say, well, it's 2,000 years. That's because the second coming hadn't come yet. But Jesus warned them that he could be like a thief in the night. I mean, it didn't happen then, but even the second coming could have taken place at any time after Christ left this earth. It could have happened. It didn't. So we have 2,000 years later, we can say, well, yeah, it hasn't happened, but it could have happened. time could have ended 1,800 years ago.
Yeah.
The final judgment could have been 2,000 years ago.
Right. And let me make sure everybody, because I'm getting eyes, so I want to make sure they're understanding what you're
Okay.
saying.
You understand
You're
what-
not saying it could have, meaning no, it did not. Make sure you're understanding what Sigel's saying. He's not saying it did. What he's saying is from any point after the time that Jesus went back to heaven, the very next day he could have come back. And that could have been the day of judgment. So you don't know when, and so you extrapolate that over the time until it actually does happen. It could have, God could have picked any point in time from then until the moment we're in presently. My point with that, Sigel, is simply is the language here doesn't, he's trying to encourage these people in the moment of what they should be doing in the moment. And that's why I focus on that. There's certainly that element still, and I guess my point is I would teach those principles from other texts. This one seems to have a very specific point in mind.
Like I say, I don't disagree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Only the phrase eon of time. So I just want us to know that it could have happened at any point.
Well, I use the word eon. It's a surprise to me because I don't remember saying it. No. What I said was, what I was trying to say was over. If he's encouraging them in Hebrews chapter 10 to be, this is coming shortly, then it's hard to put that in time after time, right? 2,000 years into the future, and it seems adequate. And I'm not saying I didn't. I just don't recall using that word. But my point is that it's not a whole lot of encouragement in some senses if he tells them, get through it, and the Lord's going to help you. Get through it and be patient through it all. And yet they're really not going to, because it happens years and years and years later. And maybe I did say eons of time later, but I just don't recall. But you understand what I'm trying to say. Yep.
Matthew 24 again, Jesus tells them that generation won't pass away until they've seen these things happen.
Yeah.
So we're making that correlation. It is upon them soon enough that generation is going to see it.
Yeah. And here, so let me go back, and you say, well, Brian, what are you doing? What, right? Why do all this? Well, here's why. Because I think sometimes we can potentially make the wrong conclusions. Let me just throw it out there for you now. So usually, when we quote Hebrews 10:25, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together in the manner of some as the manner of some is, but so much the more as we what? As we see the day approaching, and what have preachers like me have said about that? We should be worshiping more and more until Jesus comes back. That's true. It's just not what Hebrews 10:25 is teaching, right? The principle is true, but that's not what he's trying to say here. He's trying to tell them, you need to be gathering and assembling more and more, not less and less, because you're going to need more and more encouragement. You're going to need more and more help and aid and courage, because this situation's just going to get worse and worse and worse. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And all I'm trying to appreciate, and I've done this more and more as I get older, is to be very cautious about pulling a verse from any text and then start defining it without at least considering, is there a topic in mind of the author that we can define by the things that are said around that verse? And we can find ourselves, in some senses, drawing the right conclusions the wrong way, or pointing to the wrong text. And one final thought about that: in modern time, you get away with that. There's a period of time in history you get away with that. People call you on it now. People will call you on it, and they'll question you when they recognize that you've taken a thought, a verse, a sentence, and you said, well, it means this, and have never even considered what it actually means, where it was said and what it was said for. So when we go to evidence, be ready for the judgment, then let's go to those texts that talk about thief in the night. Be prepared. You don't know when the Lord's coming. Not even the Son of Man knows the hour in which God's going to send him back. Go to those texts, right? And help encourage people to appreciate the need to be ready. There's a very specific context, I believe, that he had in mind here in Hebrews chapter 10.
Long before the destruction.
That's right. Yeah. No, you're talking most likely less than a decade. A decade plus a year or two at the most likely.
Two could have applied at any time they got together.
Yeah.
Because the Lord's Day is not mentioned there. So
That's right. Yeah, he
it
didn't
could
say.
have been- It could have been any time. I mean, maybe they got together 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
I mean, it could apply to that, but we don't know.
And we know in Jerusalem, at least initially they were, right? They daily with one accord, right? And gatherings at the temple were happening regularly. Real quick, we can even think about that for a half a second, right? Because maybe that's what he's referencing here. The temptation might be when you see these calamities and this besiegement and all these difficulties start to build, the temptation might be, I don't know whether I want to go down there to Solomon's porch today. Not so sure I want to go down there and be visible. The temptation might be to stay away from gatherings. And that might fit here what the Hebrew writer is pointing to. All good thoughts, by the way. I appreciate it. It's good to just talk through it, right, and think about it together.